Ernest Henderson, he started with one hotel in 1933. At the time of his death, he had almost 100 hotels, and as I said, he had 20,000 employees. You don't get that kind of success unless you have a lot of ability to develop relationships with people who will stay with you and who will go the extra mile. How did he do it? He created for people a better vision of themselves. And how did he do that? I'm going to give you an example from his life. When Father would take over a hotel, the first thing he did on the first day that he owned the hotel would be he'd invite all the employees to come into the hotel's ballroom. And I think you might be surprised how many people work for a hotel, but take a typical Sheraton hotel, the Sheraton Park in New York, 800 employees. Well, all of these employees, on the day that Father takes over, they're a pretty demoralized group. The hotel, generally a hotel doesn't come up for sale, and which means that he wouldn't be buying the hotel unless it was in financial trouble. I mean, they're discouraged, the employees are discouraged, they're demoralized, and they're very concerned, are they going to keep their jobs? Because, you would expect, and what happens with many of his competitors, they do a house cleaning. It's a failing hotel, we need new people. Father would come and stand in front of the hundreds and hundreds of employees, and he was a shy man, so this was difficult for him, but he believed in it so much that he made himself do it. Father would announce right at the beginning that every person there was going to keep his job. Father would go on to say that he knew that the success of the hotel depended entirely on the employees and their willingness to make it a better place, to give it their all, it was them who was responsible for success, and that his entire job was to create the conditions where they could show what a good job they could do. And then he'd give them a picture of what the future held. And by the time he had 3 or 4 hotels, he could speak with authority on this. He said, this hotel is going to excel. And he had such a track record of, when he'd buy a hotel, it would do well, it would become popular, and with that he had the money to buy more hotels. Well, he'd paint a picture for the employees of what they could do and how management was there to help them be all they could be. And then, this is the first day, the first thing that he would spend money on, the first thing that he would invest capital in, was refurbishing the hotel. But it wasn't refurbishing the guest rooms. The first thing that he did was he would get the chief decorator of Sheraton, it's a woman named Mary Kennedy. She would go in, she would inspect the rooms that the guests would never see, and she would arrange for the refurbishing of, for example, the employee dining rooms, the employee bathrooms, even the shower heads. The shower heads, by the way, were exactly the same ones that would be used for the guests. So were the commodes. The locker rooms, everything was upgraded, painted, decorated, because his view was the most important part of the hotel. The guests were extremely important, but number one, upgrading the hotel, or upgrading the part for the employees. And the result was people stayed with him for life. The hotels, the only reason that Sheraton grew, he started in the depth of the Depression. The reason that Sheraton grew and that he could turn them around was the way he treated the people who worked with him. Now, with Frank, like Father, also built something from, in his case, it was a father and son operation, to one that at the time of his death was close to 20,000 people. And we do sell in 113 different countries, so he built something enormous. How did he do it? Well, one of the things Joy mentioned, and that came about because when Frank and I first married, we had just returned from our honeymoon. And it was 1988, August, and we're walking along the beach. It happened to be in Watch Hill, Rhode Island. And there we were, kind of romantic, early in the morning, not many people around, and carrying our sandals, and we're walking along the beach. And I took him by surprise by saying, Frank, I think we should entertain every single person who works for the company. Well, yeah, his reaction was pretty much what yours was. It was, no, that would be 20,000 people. That's an impossibly large number. Well, I pretended that I didn't process that no, and I said, I think we should have them 100 at a time. No, that's just way too many people. And I told him, well, let's start next end of September. No, that's way too soon. And then I told him, let's start with the secretaries. They're everywhere in the organization, and they can tell people that our parties are fun and not scary. And well, this went on for several more rounds with me saying how we were going to do it and him saying no, and me acting as if I just didn't process no. But as we kept talking, his attitude began to change from, this is crazy, to maybe there's something to it, to finally, I like it. The reason for his change was that initially, Frank's reaction was negative because he was, you might not guess it if you've seen his advertisements, but he was a very shy man. And the idea of having hundreds of people in his home was just way, way, way outside his comfort zone. But on the other hand, as he thought about it, he realized that it would be an additional way of showing the people who worked for him that they were important to him. And so it was that 6 weeks later, and beginning with the secretaries, we began what was almost weekly for close to 17 years, as long as we were together until his passing. We began a series of dinner parties, and we really had everybody, whether it was truckers or veterinarians or accountants, and certainly the secretaries, because we started with the secretaries. Well, at these parties, Frank was such a good host, because one of the things that he'd do was, say there were 100 people and we did invite them in groups of 100, he would talk with every single person there. And Frank had a gift for making people important. When he was talking with somebody, that person, was just enveloped in his caring and his attention. And he was just gifted at that. Another thing that he did was, we had a large buffet, and he would stand behind the buffet table along with some waiters, and he himself would serve the people who were his employees. And I'm standing back watching this, and I'm thinking, how many heads of Fortune 500 size companies would actually wait on their employees? And then at the end of every evening, he'd stand up in front of his guests, who were his employees, and he'd tell them that he knew that the company wouldn't be what it is today without each of them. Well, I know that these parties were just very, very important to the people who came, and I know this first of all because they'd tell me, but second of all, I would attend funerals over the years where over and over again I'd hear the same thing. A close relative of the deceased would tell me that the most moving thing in the deceased's life was being invited to Frank's home. Now, I felt that these parties, surely they were important to the people to the guests, but I also knew that they were very, very important to Frank because Frank was a deep believer in culture. He told me once, and I wrote it in my diary, that one of the most important functions of a leader is the culture that they create. Well, he wanted a culture of appreciation, recognition, and respect, and for him this was a way of doing it. And one of his reasons for recognizing how important it was Frank was a deep believer in a quote that I'm going to give you. It's a quote from William James. And William James said that the deepest principle of human nature is the craving for appreciation. And Frank knew how to do it. Successful cultures aren't an accident. Both my father and my late husband were deep believers in culture. I mentioned earlier that Frank Perdue said that one of the most important jobs of a leader is the culture that he or she creates. My father, this was back in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and I don't think they even talked about culture that much. I don't think it was like part of the radar. But he was very, very aware that the leader casts a long shadow. Both of them were deep believers that people either lived up to or lived down to what you think of them, and that your job of a leader is to give people a better vision of themselves. I feel, again, it's, to use an expression that's a little bit out of date, but it's kind of carrying coals to Newcastle, to give people in NASA any advice of how to behave, because you're already the global winners of doing it wonderfully. But I do believe that giving people a better vision of themselves is one of the best things a leadership culture can do. Thank you all very much.